They called her the janitor behind her back. The arrogant young Dr. Sterling bet $500 that the middle-aged nurse wouldn't last a week at the prestigious St. Jude Trauma Center. But when the doors burst open and a dying Navy SEAL commander was rushed in, he didn't look at the chief surgeon. He looked at the trembling nurse who was just trying to survive. What happened next didn't just silence the room. It ended careers. If you believe karma always finds a way, you'll want to see how this unfolds. Let's begin. The fluorescent lights of St. Jude's Medical Center in Virginia hummed with that relentless, sterile buzz that made everything feel cold and clinical. This wasn't just any hospital. This was the crown jewel of military trauma care on the East Coast, a steel and glass monument to cutting-edge medicine where surgeons didn't just operate, they performed miracles. At least, that's what they told themselves. Sarah Miller stood beside the supply cart in Trauma Bay 4, slowly restocking saline bags with deliberate, measured movements that drove the younger staff absolutely insane. She was 52 years old, or so her employee file claimed, with graying hair pulled back into a severe, unfashionable bun that added years to her appearance. Her scrubs were a size too large, medium blue cotton that hung loosely on a frame that looked tired, worn down by decades of invisible labor. She moved with the energy of someone who had long since given up trying to impress anyone. Not the frenetic, caffeinated scramble of the younger nurses who darted through the halls in their form-fitting fig-colored scrubs, their ponytails bouncing with youth and ambition. Sarah's movements were slow, methodical, almost maddeningly careful. Check those expiration dates again, Sarah. Doctor. Preston Sterling's voice cut through the quiet hum of the trauma bay, without him even bothering to look up from his tablet. He was 32, devastatingly handsome in that sharp-featured patrician way that came from good genes and better money. His father was a senator. His last name opened doors that talent alone never could. He was the chief resident, and he made absolutely certain everyone knew it. "I checked them 10 minutes ago, Doctor," Sarah said quietly. Her voice was raspy, gravelly, like she'd spent too many years shouting to be heard over machinery and chaos. "Then check them again," Sterling said with a smirk, glancing up just long enough to wink at the nurse beside him, a young woman named Brittany, who spent more time touching up her eyeliner than checking vitals. "We can't have patients dying because Grandma forgot to read the label. Dementia is a silent killer, you know." Brittany giggled, covering her mouth with perfectly manicured fingers. "You're terrible, Dr. Sterling." "I'm just being cautious," Sterling said louder, making sure everyone on the floor could hear. "HR keeps sending us these charity cases. I mean, look at her hands. They shake." It was true. Sarah's hands had a faint rhythmic tremor, subtle, but to a surgeon like Sterling, it was a glaring neon sign of incompetence. Sarah didn't respond. She just gripped the saline bag tighter, her knuckles turning white, and continued her work. She had only been at St. Jude's for 3 weeks. In that time, she'd been assigned the worst shifts, the messiest cleanups, and the most menial tasks. They treated her like a glorified maid who happened to have an RN license. "I heard she used to work at some rural clinic in Nebraska," another resident, Dr. Cole, whispered loudly from the nurses' station. "Probably put Band-Aids on scraped knees for 30 years. Now she thinks she can handle Tier 1 trauma care." "She won't last," Sterling said, finally standing up and smoothing his pristine white coat with the kind of theatrical flourish that made Sarah's jaw tighten. "I give it 2 more days. 1 real emergency, 1 massive hemorrhage, and she'll faint. Then we can get her out of here and get someone who actually belongs in the 21st century." Sarah finished stocking the cart. She walked past them, eyes fixed on the floor, shoulders hunched slightly forward. She wasn't deaf. She heard every word. The insults burned, but they were nothing compared to the phantom heat she sometimes felt on her skin, the memory of burning oil and desert sand. She went to the break room, poured herself a cup of stale coffee, and sat alone at the small table near the window. She rubbed her right knee absently. It throbbed when it rained, a dull, persistent ache that started deep in the joint and radiated down her shin. Just keep your head down, Sarah, she told herself, staring into the murky brown liquid. You need this pension. You need the quiet. But the quiet was about to be shattered. The klaxon didn't just ring, it screamed. It was the specific two-tone alarm that signaled a mass casualty event involving active duty personnel, the kind of sound that turned blood to ice water and adrenaline to rocket fuel. Code Black, ETA, 3 minutes. Surgical teams 1 through 4 to the bay. This is not a drill. The atmosphere in the hospital shifted instantly. The casual mockery vanished, replaced by frantic, controlled chaos. Residents grabbed tablets. Nurses abandoned their stations. The trauma bays came alive with motion. "All right, people, let's move," Sterling barked, his arrogance shifting seamlessly into command mode. "We have incoming from Andrews Air Force Base. Special Operations Transport. That means high-value targets and heavy trauma. Brittany, get the blood bank on the line. Cole, prep Bay 1. He paused, looking at Sarah as she emerged from the break room, coffee still in hand. "Sarah," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "you stay out of the way. Go manage the waiting room or something. I don't want you tripping over cords when the real work starts." "I'm trauma-certified, Doctor," Sarah said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I don't care what piece of paper you have," Sterling snapped, stepping closer, invading her space. "This is a SEAL team extraction gone wrong. High-velocity rounds, shrapnel, potential blast injuries. This isn't a flu shot clinic. Stay out of the way." He didn't wait for an answer. He spun on his heel and rushed toward the ambulance bay doors, his white coat billowing dramatically behind him. Sarah stood there for a moment, the old instinct flaring up in her chest. The urge to run toward the fire, not away from it. But she swallowed it down, crushed it beneath the weight of 3 weeks of humiliation. She stepped back against the wall near the scrub sinks, making herself invisible. The double doors flew open with a violent crash. The noise was deafening, paramedics shouting vitals, gurneys rattling over the threshold, and the sharp metallic smell of fresh blood filling the air like a crimson fog. "Male, 30s, multiple GSWs to the chest, BP 70 over palp. Male, 20s, blast amputation, left leg. Tourniquet applied, time marked 1340, and then..." In the center of the chaos, surrounded by 4 MPs and 2 frantic flight medics, came the gurney that made everyone stop and stare. "Make a hole! Move!" a medic screamed, his face sheet white beneath his helmet. "We have the HVT! High-value target! Commander Jack Reynolds! He's the unit leader!" He took a sniper round to the upper thoracic cavity and shrapnel to the neck. "BP is 70 over 40 and dropping." Sterling was on him instantly, his ego temporarily eclipsed by the sheer gravity of the situation. "Get him to Bay 1. I want a thoracotomy tray open now. Type and cross-match for 6 units. The man on the gurney was a mountain of a human being. Even pale from blood loss, Commander Reynolds looked like he'd been carved from granite. 6'4", 240 pounds of muscle and scar tissue. His tactical vest had been cut away, revealing a torso matted with blood and gauze. His eyes were fluttering, rolling back into his head. Sarah watched from the periphery, her body pressed against the wall. She saw the way the blood was pulsing from the neck wound, dark red, venous, manageable, but the chest wound, that was the problem. She took a half step forward, her trained eyes scanning the patient's anatomy in a way that had nothing to do with nursing school and everything to do with survival. Tracheal deviation, she thought, her heart rate spiking. Left shift, right chest isn't moving. The team swarmed the commander like ants on sugar. Dr. Sterling was at the head of the bed, attempting to intubate. "He's fighting the tube," Sterling shouted, frustration creeping into his voice. "Push 100 of succinylcholine. Hold him down." The commander was thrashing. Even half dead, his survival instinct was violent, primal. He grabbed Dr. Cole's wrist with a bloody hand, his grip like a vice, veins bulging in his forearm. "Restrain him," Sterling yelled, his face turning red. "We need that airway secure." "He can't breathe, you idiot," Sarah whispered to herself. She watched the monitor. The oxygen saturation wasn't coming up even with the bag valve mask forcing air into his lungs. His heart rate was climbing, tachycardia, but his blood pressure was narrowing. Pulse pressure dropping. Sterling was fixated on the neck wound, his gloved hands working frantically to clamp the bleeder. "It's a jugular nick. Clamp it. We need to stop the bleeding before we intubate." "Doctor," Sarah said. She didn't mean to speak. The word just forced itself out, escaping like steam from a pressure valve. Sterling ignored her. "I said clamp it. Can someone get this guy's arm down?" "Dr. Sterling," Sarah shouted, stepping away from the wall. The room went silent for a microsecond, just long enough for everyone to register that the janitor had spoken. Sterling whipped his head around, his face mask splattered with tiny specks of blood. "Get her out of here. Security." "He has a tension pneumothorax," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a low, commanding register that didn't match the grandma persona they knew. "Look at the tracheal deviation. It's shifting left. You're trying to intubate a collapsed lung. You're going to kill him in 30 seconds. Dr. Sterling stared at her, his eyes wide with fury and disbelief. "Who do you think you are?" "I am the attending trauma surgeon here. You are a nurse who can barely restock a cart. Get out." "Look at his neck," Sarah pointed, her hand steady now, the tremor completely gone. "Not the bleeding wound, the throat structure. Look." Under the harsh lights, barely visible beneath the grime of war and blood, the commander's windpipe was indeed pushed slightly to the left. "His right," Dr. Cole stammered, looking at the patient with dawning horror. "Preston, look. No breath sounds on the right. Distended neck veins." Sterling hesitated. In trauma medicine, hesitation is death. His ego was wrestling with the visual evidence. If he listened to the janitor, he looked weak. If he didn't, the patient died. "It's just swelling from the shrapnel," Sterling doubled down, his pride winning the battle over logic. "Proceed with intubation. If we don't secure the airway, he dies anyway. Push the drugs." "No." Sarah moved. She didn't run like a young nurse. She moved with efficient, explosive power, the kind of movement that comes from muscle memory forged in fire. She bypassed the scrub line, grabbing a 14-gauge angiocath needle from the open tray. "Security, stop her!" Sterling screamed, but Sarah was already at the bedside. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't check the chart. She placed her left hand on the commander's chest, feeling for the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, a motion she had performed 1,000 times in the backs of Blackhawks and in dusty tents under mortar fire. "Don't you touch him!" Sterling lunged at her. Sarah dropped her shoulder, checking Sterling with a rigid elbow that sent the young doctor stumbling backward into a tray of instruments. It wasn't a push. It was a tactical block, delivered with the precision of someone who had been trained to disable threats without thinking. In the same motion, she drove the needle into the commander's chest. Hiss! The sound was audible throughout the room, the violent rush of trapped air escaping, releasing the pressure that was crushing the commander's heart and good lung. Immediately the monitor changed. The frantic beeping slowed. The oxygen saturation numbers began to tick upward. 80, 85, 90. Commander Reynolds gasped, a massive, ragged intake of air. His eyes snapped open, no longer rolling. He was breathing. The room was frozen. Dr. Sterling was picking himself up off the floor, his face a mask of shock and rage. The other nurses were staring at Sarah as if she had grown a second head. Even the MPs looked stunned. Sarah didn't look at them. Her hand was still on the commander's chest, stabilizing the needle. She looked down at the patient, her expression calm, almost serene. "Breathe, Commander," she said softly. "I've got you. You're at St. Jude's. You're safe." Reynolds's vision was blurry, swimming with drugs and pain. He saw the white ceiling, the blinding lights, and the faces of strangers. But then he locked eyes with the woman holding the needle in his chest. He blinked. He squinted, trying to focus through the haze. Sarah's face was calm, professional. But her eyes, her gray-blue eyes, held something he recognized. Something he had seen in the sandbox, in the mountains, in the places where only warriors go. Reynolds's lips moved. He was trying to speak, but the trauma was too great. He lifted his right hand, the one that had been gripping Dr. Cole, and reached toward Sarah. Dr. Sterling stormed back to the table, his voice trembling with humiliation. "You are finished. You assaulted a doctor. You performed an unauthorized procedure. You are done. I will have your license revoked before the sun comes up. Get away from my patient." "Wait," Dr. Cole said softly, his eyes wide. "Look." Commander Reynolds wasn't pushing Sarah away. His bloodied hand had found the fabric of her scrub top. He wasn't grabbing her in aggression. He was gripping her sleeve like a lifeline. He pulled her closer. His eyes intense, searching her face. He whispered one word, choked and raspy but audible enough for the surgical team to hear. "Angel." Sarah's stoic mask cracked for just a fraction of a second. Her eyes softened. "I'm here, Jack," she whispered back. "I'm here." Sterling looked between them, confused and furious. "What is going on?" "Do you know this woman?" Commander Reynolds didn't look at Sterling. He didn't look at the expensive equipment or the pristine trauma bay. He kept his eyes on Sarah. With monumental effort, he released her scrub and tried to move his body. He grimaced in agony, but forced his arm upward. Slowly, trembling with pain. The Navy SEAL commander brought his hand to his forehead. He saluted. It wasn't a casual wave. It was a formal, sustained salute of absolute respect. Sarah didn't return the salute. She was a nurse now, not a soldier. She simply nodded, a single, sharp nod of acknowledgement. "At ease, Commander," she said quietly. "Let us work." Reynolds dropped his hand, his body finally relaxing as the anesthesia took him under. But a faint smile lingered on his lips. Sterling stood there, his mouth agape. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. "What?" Sterling whispered. "What the hell just happened?" Sarah turned to him. The shaky, timid grandma was gone. In her place stood someone cold, hard, and infinitely more dangerous than the doctor could ever comprehend. "He's stable," Sarah said, her voice flat. "Do your job, doctor. Fix the neck. I'll prep the chest tube." She paused, her gray-blue eyes locking onto his. "And if you shout at me again while a patient is dying, I'll break your fingers." 2 hours later, the adrenaline had faded, replaced by the sterile, freezing air of the hospital administration wing. Sarah sat in a plush leather chair that felt too soft, too expensive. Across the mahogany table sat Mr. Henderson, the hospital administrator, Mrs. Galloway, the director of nursing, and Dr. Sterling. Sterling had cleaned up. He'd changed out of his bloodied scrubs into a crisp navy blue suit. He looked like the picture of medical authority, confident, composed, untouchable. Sarah, by contrast, was still in her soiled scrubs. There was a smear of Commander Reynolds's blood on her sleeve that had dried to a rust color. She hadn't been allowed to change. They had escorted her straight from the OR to this room like a criminal. "This is a clear-cut case of gross misconduct," Sterling said, leaning back and tapping a gold pen against the table. She not only insubordinately interrupted a critical procedure, but she physically assaulted an attending physician. "I have a bruise on my chest, Mr. Henderson." She elbowed me. Mr. Henderson, a man who cared more about liability insurance than patient care, looked over his glasses at Sarah. "Ms. Miller, is this true? Did you strike Dr. Sterling?" "I blocked him," Sarah said quietly, looking at her hands. Those shaking hands that had been rock steady when it mattered. "He was about to interfere with a life-saving procedure. I neutralized the threat to the patient." "Neutralized the threat?" Sterling scoffed, a cruel laugh escaping him. "Listen to her. She thinks she's in an action movie. You're a nurse, Sarah, a geriatric nurse at that. You are not a surgeon. You are not a trauma specialist. You stuck a needle into the chest of a high-value military asset without authorization. If I hadn't stepped in to fix the damage, Commander Reynolds would be dead." Sarah looked up slowly. Her eyes were tired, dark circles carved deep beneath them. "The commander is stable, isn't he? His O2 stats are 99%. His lung reinflated. The chest tube is draining perfectly. That is due to my team's follow-up, Sterling lied smoothly. We had to clean up your mess. You got lucky, Sarah. Blind luck. But luck isn't a medical strategy. You are a liability. Imagine if you'd punctured his heart. The lawsuit would bankrupt this hospital. Mrs. Galloway, the director of nursing, looked pained. She knew Sarah was a hard worker, but she was terrified of Sterling. The Sterling family donated millions to the hospital wing. Sarah, she said gently, you have to understand the protocol. You went outside your scope of practice. You can't just stab patients. He was dying, Sarah said, her voice hardening. He had a tension pneumothorax. Dr. Sterling was treating a neck wound while the patient suffocated. Protocol doesn't matter when the patient is turning blue. And that's exactly the cowboy attitude we can't have, Mr. Henderson said, slamming a file shut. Ms. Miller, Dr. Sterling is the chief resident. His judgment is the final word in that trauma bay. By overriding him, you undermined the hierarchy of this institution. Henderson slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a termination notice. Effective immediately, your employment at St. Jude's is terminated for cause, Henderson said. We will be reporting this incident to the State Nursing Board. You will likely lose your license, Ms. Miller. Security will escort you to your locker to retrieve your personal belongings. Sterling gave a small, victorious smile. He had won. He had erased the witness to his incompetence. Sarah stared at the paper. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She had been fired from better places. She had been shot at by snipers in a piece of paper from a bureaucrat in a didn't scare her. All right. She stood up, her knee popping loudly in the silence of the... She grimaced, gripped the edge of the table, and straightened her back. I have one question, Sarah said, looking directly at Sterling. Make it quick, Sterling checked his Rolex. When you go check on him, Sarah said, lowering her voice to a deep, intense murmur. When you look Commander Reynolds in the eye, are you going to tell him it was you who saved him? Are you going to steal that valor? Sterling's face turned crimson. Get out! Sarah turned and walked to the door. She didn't look back. She walked with that same slow, shambling limp they had all mocked. But as she left the office, the air in the room felt lighter, as if a heavy, dangerous presence had just departed. Good riddance, Sterling muttered. Now I have to deal with the family. Apparently Reynolds comes from a military dynasty. I need to make sure they know their son was in excellent hands. He had no idea the family wasn't the only ones coming. It was the United States government. The recovery ICU at St. Jude's was quiet, filled only with the rhythmic hum of ventilators and the soft beeping of heart monitors. Commander Jack Reynolds lay in bed propped up on pillows. He was groggy, his chest wrapped in thick bandages, a chest tube snaking out from his ribs. But he was alive. His mind was still piecing together the fragments, the ambush, the helicopter flight, the sensation of drowning in his own blood. And then, the angel. He remembered her face. It was older, weathered by years of squinting into the sun. He remembered the gray hair. He remembered the voice. Breathe, Commander. Nurse, Reynolds whispered hoarsely, his voice like gravel. A young nurse, Brittany, rushed to his side. Commander Reynolds, you're awake. Dr. Sterling said you might be unconscious for another hour. Can I get you some ice chips? Where is she? Reynolds asked, ignoring the offer. Who, sir? The woman, Reynolds gasped. The one with gray hair, the one who put in the needle. Brittany's face fell. She looked uncomfortable. Oh, you mean Sarah? The older nurse? Sarah, Reynolds tested the name. It sounded right. Get her. I need to speak to her. Brittany bit her lip. I'm sorry, Commander. Sarah isn't here anymore. Well, there was an incident. She was escorted off the premises about 20 minutes ago. Reynolds's eyes narrowed. The pain medication was making him float. But rage acted as an anchor. Escorted off. Why? She wasn't supposed to do what she did, Brittany whispered, leaning in as if sharing gossip. Dr. Sterling fired her. She broke protocol. Reynolds tried to sit up, causing the monitors to blare a warning. She saved my life. Your protocol was killing me. Sir, please lay back. Brittany panicked. I'll get Dr. Sterling. At that moment, the double doors to the ICU swung open. But it wasn't Dr. Sterling. It was a wall of green uniforms. 2 military police officers stepped in first, scanning the room with practiced intensity. Then came a colonel holding a briefcase. And finally, walking with a cane but moving with the energy of a freight train, came General Thomas Mitchell. General Mitchell was a legend, 4 stars, chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He was the kind of man whose presence made the air pressure change. Dr. Sterling came running down the hall, adjusting his tie, a wide, sycophantic smile plastered on his face. He had been waiting for the VIPs, hoping to schmooze his way into a military consultancy contract. General Mitchell, Sterling beamed, extending a hand. I'm Dr. Preston Sterling, Chief Resident. It is an honor. I'm happy to report that Commander Reynolds is stable. General Mitchell walked right past Sterling's outstretched hand, as if the doctor didn't exist. He walked straight to bed one. Jack, the general said, his voice gruff but warm. You look like hell, son. Feel like it, sir, Reynolds grunted. But I'm breathing. So I hear. Mitchell nodded. He looked at the monitors, then turned slowly to face the room. The pleasant demeanor vanished. The general looked at Sterling, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Who is the attending in charge? I am. Sterling stepped forward, his smile faltering slightly. Dr. Sterling, I performed the stabilization. You? The general looked him up and down with open skepticism. My report from the flight medic said Reynolds had an acute pneumothorax on arrival. They said he was minutes from death. You decompressed him? It was a team effort, Sterling said, puffing out his chest. I directed the procedure. We had some interference from a staff member, but I managed the situation. Interference? Reynolds growled from the bed. Sir, he fired her. He fired the medic who saved me. General Mitchell's eyes snapped to Reynolds. The medic? You mean the woman? Yes, sir, Reynolds said. Sarah. She knew the drill. She moved like one of us. This clown, he gestured weakly at Sterling, was staring at my neck while my lungs were collapsing. She pushed him aside. The general turned back to Sterling. His face was unreadable, which was terrifying. You fired the woman who performed the needle decompression. She was a nurse, Sterling defended himself, his voice rising. She was an old, incompetent nurse with shaky hands. She assaulted me. She had no right to touch a patient of this caliber. Shaky hands, the general repeated softly. He looked at the colonel beside him. Colonel, pull the file. The colonel opened the briefcase and pulled out a thick black folder. It wasn't a hospital personnel file. It was a classified Department of Defense dossier. Dr. Sterling, General Mitchell said, his voice dangerously calm. Do you know who Sarah Miller is? She's a nobody, Sterling spat. A transfer from Nebraska. Sarah Miller, the general began, reading from the file without looking at it, is the retired alias of Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Dusty Miller. She served 3 tours in Iraq and 4 in Afghanistan as the lead trauma specialist for the 75th Ranger Regiment and later JSOC. She didn't work in a clinic, doctor. She worked in the backs of Chinooks while taking AK-47 fire. The room went deathly silent. Brittany gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Sterling's face went pale. She has shaky hands, the general continued, his voice rising, because she sustained nerve damage in Fallujah while holding pressure on a soldier's femoral artery for 6 hours after their convoy was hit by an IED. She refused evacuation until her men were safe. The general took a step closer to Sterling, looming over him. She is a recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross and the Silver Star. She is widely regarded in the special operations community as the ghost medic because she brings men back from the dead. Sterling opened his mouth, but no sound came out. And you? The general jabbed his finger into Sterling's expensive suit. Right where the bruise from Sarah's elbow was forming. You fired her for incompetence." "I didn't know," Sterling stammered. "She was just restocking carts. She looked tired of war," Reynolds said from the bed. "She just wanted peace. And you treated her like trash." General Mitchell turned to the colonel. "Find her, now." The colonel touched his earpiece. "I have perimeter security. They say a woman matching her description just boarded the Metrobus line heading downtown. She's leaving." "Get details," Mitchell barked. "We're not letting her walk away like this." The general turned back to Sterling. "Doctor, I suggest you start updating your resume. Because if I find out you insulted a war hero and put my commander's life at risk because of your ego, I'm going to make sure you never practice medicine in this country again. I'll have your license pulled so fast your head will spin." "But she assaulted me," Sterling cried, desperate. "Son," the general smiled, and it was a wolf's smile. "If Sarah Miller wanted to hurt you, you wouldn't be standing here complaining. You'd be in the morgue." The general turned sharply. "Let's go. We have a hero to catch." The city bus number 42 was a rattling cage of misery, smelling of wet wool, diesel exhaust, and hopelessness. Outside, the Virginia sky had opened up, unleashing a torrent of freezing rain that hammered the roof like shrapnel. Sarah Miller sat in the very back row, pressed into the corner seat. The vibration of the engine traveled up through the floor, making her teeth chatter. But she barely felt it. She was numb. In her lap, she clutched a pathetic, rain-soaked cardboard box, the standard box you get when you're fired. Inside, it summed up her entire time at St. Jude's Medical Center. A cracked coffee mug that said, "World's Okayest Nurse," a stethoscope she'd bought with her own money because the hospital-supplied ones were garbage, and a small dying succulent plant. She stared out the window, watching the gray urban landscape of Arlington blur into streaks of concrete and regret. "It's over," she told herself. The thought wasn't anger. It was just a heavy, suffocating fact. For 10 years, Sarah had lived as a ghost. She had buried Dusty, the legend, the operator, the woman who performed surgeries in the backs of burning Humvees, deep inside this shell of an invisible middle-aged woman. She had traded the adrenaline of combat for the safety of anonymity. She had done it to survive, to quiet the nightmares. She thought that if she kept her head down, if she let people like Dr. Sterling mock her walk and her age, she could live a peaceful life. But the warrior in her hadn't died. It was just sleeping. And today it had woken up just long enough to save a life and ruin hers. "He's going to press charges," she whispered to the condensation on the glass. She could already see the police report. Assault on a physician. Practicing medicine without a license. Sterling would ruin her. She would lose her nursing certification. She would lose her pension. She would end up greeting customers at a grocery store, and no one would ever know that the nice old lady scanning their apples once held the rank of lieutenant colonel. "Next stop, 4th and Main." The driver's voice crackled over the static-filled intercom. "Transfer to the blue line." Sarah sighed, shifting her weight. Her bad knee, the one shattered by a mortar blast in Kandahar, throbbed in sync with the windshield wipers. Thump, thump, thump. She closed her eyes, preparing for the lonely walk to her apartment. Scream. The bus didn't just stop, it lurched violently, tires locking up on the wet asphalt. Passengers were thrown forward against the seats in front of them. Someone screamed. A bag of groceries spilled in the aisle, sending oranges rolling like billiard balls. "What the hell?" the driver yelled, slamming his hand on the horn. "Are you crazy?" Sarah grabbed the rail to steady herself, her heart hammering. She looked out the rear window. Her stomach dropped. The street behind them was blocked. 2 black SUVs, massive and imposing, had pulled sideways across the lanes, cutting off traffic. Their grille lights were flashing red and blue, blindingly bright in the gloom. She looked forward. 3 more SUVs had boxed the bus in from the front, and beyond them, she saw the distinct olive-drab paint of military Humvees. The bus was surrounded. "It's a raid," a teenager in the middle row whispered, holding up his phone to record. "Dude, it's a full-on raid." Sarah sank lower in her seat, pulling her coat collar up. Sterling called the police, she thought, panic finally piercing her numbness. But this isn't police. This is federal. The bus driver opened the pneumatic doors, his hands raised high in the air. "I didn't do nothing, don't shoot. I'm just driving the route." Through the rain-streaked window, Sarah saw figures moving. They didn't move like city cops. They moved with the terrifying fluid precision of apex predators. They wore rain ponchos over tactical gear, drop-leg holsters, and earpieces. MPs, military police. "Please remain seated," a voice boomed from the front, amplified by a megaphone. "This vehicle is under federal interdiction." The bus fell deathly silent. The only sound was the rain drumming on the roof and the heavy breathing of terrified passengers. Sarah's hands shook, not from age, but from the adrenaline dump she hadn't felt since Fallujah. She looked at her hands clutching that stupid box of junk. She prepared to be handcuffed. She prepared for the humiliation of being dragged off the bus in front of strangers. 2 MPs boarded the bus. They were giants, filling the narrow entryway. They didn't look at the driver. They scanned the passengers row by row, their eyes hidden behind dark ballistic glasses despite the gloom. "Clear," the first MP said into his radio. "Target is in the rear." They stepped aside, and then the sound of a cane tapping against the metal steps echoed through the silence. Clack, clack, clack. A man ascended into the bus. He wasn't wearing tactical gear. He was wearing a dress uniform, immaculate and dry, protected by an umbrella held by an aide outside. 4 silver stars gleamed on his shoulders. The ribbons on his chest were a colorful mosaic of American history. Wars fought, blood spilled, victories won. General Thomas Mitchell, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The passengers gasped. Even civilians knew who this man was. He was the face of the military on the nightly news. General Mitchell walked down the narrow aisle of the dirty city bus. He walked past the teenager filming with a phone. He walked past the spilled oranges. He looked at no one. His eyes were fixed on the very last row. Sarah didn't stand up. She couldn't. She felt small, dirty, and ashamed. She looked down at her cracked mug. The general stopped in front of her. He stood there for a long moment, the silence stretching until it was painful. "You're a hard woman to track down, Dusty," Mitchell said softly. His voice wasn't the booming command voice he used on TV. It was warm, laced with an old familiar pain. Sarah looked up, tears finally spilling over her lashes. "Hello, Tom." "You look terrible, Sarah," he said, a small, sad smile tugging at his lips. "I feel like it," she whispered. I messed up, Tom. I assaulted a civilian doctor. I broke protocol. She gestured helplessly to the box in her lap. "I just wanted to save him." "I know," Mitchell said. He looked at the cardboard box, then at her scrubs stained with the blood of Commander Reynolds. His expression hardened, shifting from an old friend to a vengeful general. "They fired you for saving the life of a Navy SEAL commander, for embarrassing a rich kid with a scalpel?" Sarah nodded, her voice trembling. "Yes, sir." Mitchell's jaw tightened. "Well, that rich kid is about to have a very bad day." The general reached out, not to shake her hand, but to take the cardboard box from her lap. "Sir, you don't have to carry that," Sarah protested weakly. "It's trash." "It's not trash," Mitchell said firmly, tucking the box under his arm like it was classified intelligence. "It's evidence of their stupidity. And you are not taking the bus home, Colonel." He extended his free hand. "Come on, we have a mission." "Mission?" Sarah hesitated. "Tom, I'm retired. I'm fired. I'm nobody." "You are Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Miller," Mitchell said, his voice rising so every passenger on the bus could hear him. "You are the ghost medic of the 75th Rangers. You are the reason Jack Reynolds is breathing right now, and we do not leave our heroes rotting on public transit in the rain." Sarah stared at his hand. It was a lifeline. It was an invitation back to the world she had left behind, the world of honor, of duty, of respect. Slowly, she reached out. Her rough, calloused hand gripped his. As she stood up, her bad knee popped, But she didn't wince. She straightened her back. She pulled her shoulders back. The slump of the tired old nurse evaporated, replaced by the posture of an officer. Mitchell turned and led her down the aisle. As they passed the passengers, the mood shifted. The fear was gone, replaced by awe. The teenager with the phone lowered it out of respect. An old man in the front row, wearing a faded Vietnam veteran hat, stood up as they passed. He didn't say a word. He just nodded. They stepped off the bus and into the freezing rain, but Sarah didn't feel the cold. A dozen soldiers were waiting outside, standing in rigid attention as an honor guard. As soon as Sarah's boot touched the asphalt, the colonel in charge shouted, "Present! Arms!" 12 rifles snapped up. 12 hands rose in perfect unison to their brows. They weren't saluting the general. They were looking straight at Sarah. Sarah stopped. She felt the breath catch in her throat. She looked at Mitchell. "For me?" she whispered. "For the angel of the sandbox." Mitchell nodded. He gestured to the open door of the lead-armored SUV. "Your chariot awaits, Dusty. We're going back to St. Jude's." "Why?" Sarah asked, wiping the rain and tears from her face. Mitchell's eyes glittered with a dangerous, righteous light. "Because Commander Reynolds is awake, and because I want to see the look on Dr. Sterling's face when I walk back in there with you." Sarah climbed into the leather seat of the SUV. The warmth enveloped her as the door closed, shutting out the rain and the noise of the city. She realized something. She wasn't running anymore. "Driver," Mitchell ordered from the seat beside her. "Lights and sirens. I want them to hear the thunder coming." The engine roared to life. The convoy peeled away from the bus, tires screaming on the wet pavement, racing back toward the hospital to deliver the ultimate dose of karma. The main lobby of St. Jude's Medical Center was a cathedral of glass and steel, usually a place of hushed whispers and hurried footsteps. But today the atmosphere was brittle with tension. It felt less like a hospital and more like a courtroom waiting for a verdict. Mr. Henderson, the hospital administrator, paced back and forth near the reception desk. He was a small man who sweated easily, and right now his forehead was glistening. He checked his watch for the 10th time in a minute. "They're late," Henderson muttered, wiping his brow with a handkerchief. "The general said 1400 hours. It's 1402. Why are they late?" Dr. Preston Sterling stood beside him, leaning against the marble pillar with practiced nonchalance. He had retied his tie 3 times. He had checked his reflection in the glass doors. To the casual observer, he looked confident, the very picture of a handsome, wealthy chief resident. But his eyes were darting nervously. "Relax, Henderson," Sterling said, though his voice was a little too high. "It's a power move. The military loves to make civilians wait. Look, General Mitchell is probably just coming to smooth things over. He needs us. St. Jude's handles 40% of DoD specialized reconstructive surgeries in this state. He's not going to jeopardize that contract over some fired nurse." "I hope you're right, Preston," Henderson hissed. "Because if you're wrong and we lose the Tier 1 funding, the board of directors will have my head on a platter." "I'm always right," Sterling scoffed, adjusting his cuffs. "I saved that commander." The nurse panicked. "That's the narrative. Stick to it." Suddenly, the conversation died. The receptionists stopped typing. The visitors in the waiting area looked up from their magazines. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. Through the rain-slicked glass of the automatic revolving doors, blue and red lights washed over the lobby walls. It wasn't just one car. It was a procession. A fleet of black government SUVs pulled up to the curb, flanked by military police motorcycles. The vehicles stopped with aggressive precision. Doors flew open in unison. "Here we go," Sterling whispered, straightening his spine. "Showtime." Soldiers in full-dress uniform spilled out of the vehicles, forming a corridor from the curb to the doors. They stood like statues, rain bouncing off their covers, rifles at their sides. Then General Thomas Mitchell stepped out. He didn't run from the rain. He walked through it, as if it didn't dare touch him. He carried his cane, but he didn't lean on it. He wielded it like a weapon. And then the person beside him emerged. Sterling blinked. He squinted. It was Sarah, but it wasn't the Sarah he knew. Gone were the oversized, stained scrubs that made her look shapeless and tired. Gone was the fearful posture of an employee trying to be invisible.
Sarah was wearing a vintage olive-drab field jacket over a clean set of black fatigues. The jacket was old, faded by desert suns, but the patches on the shoulder were crisp and bright. On her collar, silver oak leaves caught the lobby lights. She walked in step with the general, not behind him, but beside him. Her limp was still there.
A hitch in her step, but now it didn't look like weakness. It looked like a battle scar. The automatic doors slid open. The sound of the rain outside was cut off as they stepped into the climate-controlled silence of the lobby. Mr. Henderson stepped forward, his smile plastered on like a mask. General Mitchell. What a profound honor. General Mitchell walked right past him. The general only stopped when he was 5 feet from Dr. Sterling. The physical difference was staggering. Sterling was taller, younger, wearing a $3,000 suit. Mitchell was old, scarred, leaning on a cane. Yet Mitchell loomed over the doctor like a mountain overshadowing a pebble. Dr. Sterling, Mitchell said. His voice was low, rolling through the lobby like distant thunder. General, Sterling nodded, trying to maintain his smirk. I assume you're here to debrief on Commander Reynolds' condition. I'm happy to report that despite the interference we encountered, my team stabilized him. Your team, Mitchell repeated. He turned his head slowly to look at the balcony where the entire nursing staff, including Brittany and Dr. Cole, were watching. Is that what we're calling it? Excuse me? Mitchell reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a tablet. He tapped the screen and held it up. It was a still image from the trauma bay security camera. It showed Sterling staring at the neck wound while Sarah's hand was on the commander's chest, needle inserted. I've spent the last hour reviewing the telemetry data and the video feeds, Mitchell announced, his voice projecting to the rafters. Commander Reynolds entered this facility with a tension pneumothorax. His trachea was deviated 3 centimeters to the left. His jugular veins were distended. The general lowered the tablet and looked Sterling in the eye. A first-year combat medic in a muddy ditch in Kandahar would have spotted that in 4 seconds. You, the chief resident of an elite trauma center, missed it for 2 minutes. You were watching him suffocate while you played with a surface wound. The lobby was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Sterling's face turned a violent shade of red. That is a matter of clinical interpretation. No, Mitchell snapped. It is a matter of incompetence. And when this woman, he gestured to Sarah, attempted to save the patient's life, you assaulted her, you belittled her, and you fired her. Mitchell stepped back, giving the floor to Sarah. Sarah looked at Sterling. She didn't look angry. She looked at him with the calm, terrifying clarity of a sniper acquiring a target. You called me a janitor, Sarah said softly. Her voice wasn't raspy anymore. It was steel. You bet $500 that I wouldn't last a week. Sterling swallowed hard. Sarah, look. Emotions were running high. We can discuss severance compensation. I don't want your money, Sarah interrupted. I served 20 years in the United States Army, Rangers and JSOC. I've pulled shrapnel out of men's chests with my bare hands while taking fire. I've forgotten more about trauma medicine than you will ever learn at your country club medical school. She took a step forward. You didn't just endanger a patient. You dishonored the profession. You made medicine about you, not about the patient. Mr. Henderson, sensing the ship was sinking, made his move. He stepped between them, turning his back on Sterling and facing the general. General Mitchell, Henderson said, his voice trembling. St. Jude's had no knowledge of Ms. Miller's distinguished background. We were misled by Dr. Sterling regarding the events in the ER. We take full responsibility. You take responsibility? Mitchell asked dryly. Absolutely. Henderson nodded frantically. Dr. Sterling's contract is terminated effective immediately. We will be reporting him to the State Medical Board for negligence. What? Sterling screamed, the Golden Boy facade cracking completely. You can't do this! My father is Senator Sterling. I fund this wing. Your father, Mitchell said calmly, is on the phone with the Secretary of Defense right now, explaining why his son nearly killed a decorated Navy SEAL commander. I don't think he'll be much help to you today, son. 2 security guards, the same ones Sterling had ordered to throw Sarah out hours before, stepped forward. They looked to Henderson for a signal. Henderson nodded. They grabbed Sterling by the arms. "Get your hands off me!" Sterling screamed, thrashing as they dragged him toward the revolving doors. "She's just a nurse! She's nobody! You'll regret this!" His screams faded as the glass doors spun, spitting him out into the cold, pouring rain, without an umbrella. Silence returned to the lobby, but now it felt lighter, cleaner. "Now," General Mitchell said, turning to Henderson. "About Ms. Miller." Yes, please." Henderson smiled desperately. "Ms. Miller, Colonel Miller, it would be an honor to have you back. Name your price, Chief of Nursing, Director of Patient Care." Sarah looked around the lobby. She saw the young nurses looking at her with awe. She saw the residents who were terrified of making mistakes. She saw a hospital that had lost its way. "I don't want to be Chief of Nursing," Sarah said. "I want the residency program." Henderson blinked. "The teaching program?" "Your doctors are arrogant," Sarah said bluntly. "They know books, but they don't know people. They don't know how to listen. I want to take over the trauma training protocols. I want to teach them that the patient is the priority, not their egos." "Done," Henderson said immediately. "Consider it done." "Good," the general grunted. "But there's still one more thing to do." The elevator chime sounded. Ding. Everyone turned. The main elevator doors opened. A nurse was pushing a wheelchair, but the man sitting in it raised his hand. "Stop!" Commander Jack Reynolds was pale. His chest was heavily bandaged beneath the hospital gown. He had tubes in his nose and an IV pole rolling beside him, but he was wearing his Navy cover, the white hat of an officer. "Sir." "You shouldn't be up," the nurse whispered. "Help me stand," Reynolds ordered. That wasn't a request. The nurse hesitated, then supported his arm. Reynolds gritted his teeth. A sheen of sweat broke out on his forehead. Every muscle in his torso screamed in protest as he forced himself upright. His legs trembled violently, but he stood. He looked Sarah in the eye across the entire length of the lobby. Sarah's composure, which had held through the entire confrontation with Sterling, began to crumble. Her chin trembled. "Jack," she whispered. "You stubborn fool. Sit down." "Not yet," Reynolds rasped. His voice was weak, but it reached every corner of the room. "They told me the janitor saved me. They told me she got fired." He gave a shaky, pained laugh. Taking a deep breath, bracing himself against the IV pole, he spoke to the room. "I've been in 12 combat zones," Reynolds said. "I've been shot, stabbed, and blown up. I know what a hero looks like, and it's not some guy in a suit." He looked at Sarah. The history between them, the shared understanding of sacrifice, of pain, of the burden of survival, radiated in that gaze. Slowly, fighting against agony, his right hand braced against his ribs, Commander Reynolds raised his left hand. He saluted. It was crisp, perfect, rendered with absolute reverence. "Thank you, Dusty," he said. Sarah felt hot tears on her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. She snapped her heels together, ignoring the pain in her damaged knee, and raised her hand. She returned the salute. "At ease, Commander," she said, her voice breaking. For 1 second there was silence. Then, from the balcony, Dr. Cole started clapping. Then Brittany. Then the patients. Then the security guards. The applause turned into a roar. It wasn't polite applause. It was a thunderous ovation. It wrapped around Sarah, purging years of invisibility. It was a sound louder than the insults, louder than the doubts, louder than the demons of her past. General Mitchell stepped back, tapping his cane on the floor, smiling like a proud father. Sarah Miller was home. 3 days later, Commander Reynolds was sitting up in bed, eating Jell-O and complaining about the hospital food when the lights went out. Not flickering, not a brownout. Complete, sudden darkness. The backup generators kicked in after 5 seconds, bathing the ICU in eerie red emergency lighting. Alarms began to wail throughout the building. Sarah was in the nurse's station reviewing charts. Her head snapped up instantly. Her body went rigid. That's not a power failure, she thought. That's deliberate. She moved to the window overlooking the parking lot. 4 black vans had pulled up to the service entrance. Men in dark tactical gear were pouring out, moving with professional precision toward the building. Not police, not military, contractors. Sarah's blood turned to ice. She knew exactly what this was. Reynolds had been part of a classified operation in Yemen. Someone wanted him silenced before he could testify. She sprinted back to the ICU. "Brittany, get everyone into the secure rooms. Lock the doors. Do it now." "What? Why? Now?" Sarah's command voice cut through the confusion like a blade. Brittany's eyes went wide. She grabbed the intercom. "Code Silver! Code Silver! Active threat! ICU level 3. Sarah ran to Reynolds' room. He was already sitting up, ripping out his IV. "How many?" he asked calmly. "At least 8. Contractors. They're coming for you." Reynolds tried to stand, but his legs buckled. The surgery had taken too much out of him. "I can't fight," he growled, furious at his own weakness. "You don't have to," Sarah said. She grabbed a scalpel from the medical tray and tucked it into her waistband. "I will." Reynolds stared at her. "Dusty. Stay here. Lock the door behind me. If anyone comes through who isn't me, you put a pen through their eye socket." She didn't wait for an answer. Sarah moved into the hallway. The red emergency lights cast long shadows. She could hear boots on the stairwell, heavy, tactical boots moving fast. She ducked into the supply closet and grabbed an oxygen tank. Not the small portable ones. The big industrial cylinder, 40 pounds of compressed gas in a steel shell. The stairwell door burst open. 2 men in black fatigues, suppressed rifles raised, moved into the corridor with textbook precision. Sarah stepped out behind them, swinging the oxygen tank like a medieval mace. Crack. The tank connected with the first man's skull. He dropped like a sack of cement, his rifle clattering to the floor. The second contractor spun. Bringing his weapon up, Sarah was already inside his reach. She drove the scalpel into his thigh, hitting the femoral artery with surgical precision. He screamed, dropping his rifle to clutch the wound. She caught the rifle before it hit the ground, checked the chamber, flicked off the safety. Muscle memory. 2 more contractors rounded the corner. They saw her, a woman in blue scrubs holding their teammate's rifle, and hesitated for a fraction of a second. Sarah didn't hesitate. Pop, pop, suppressed shots, center mass. Both men went down. From the stairwell she heard shouting. More were coming. Sarah keyed the hospital intercom with one hand, still holding the rifle with the other. "This is Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Miller, United States Army Rangers, to any federal or military personnel in the building. We have hostile contractors attempting to breach ICU level 3. I am engaging. Send backup." She released the button. Then she smiled, a cold, predatory smile that hadn't touched her face in a decade. "Come on, boys," she whispered to the darkness. "Let's see if you're as good as you think you are." The ghost medic was back, and she was hunting. The firefight lasted 8 minutes. Sarah held the corridor using every trick she'd learned in Fallujah. Controlled bursts, constant movement. Using the hospital's architecture as cover. The contractors were good, but they were used to fighting soldiers. They weren't prepared for a combat medic who knew exactly where to shoot, to incapacitate without killing. By the time the FBI's hostage rescue team crashed through the front entrance, 6 contractors were zip-tied on the floor, groaning from non-lethal wounds. 2 had fled. Sarah was sitting on the nurse's desk, calmly field-stripping the captured rifle. "Clear!" an HRT operator shouted, sweeping into the ICU. He stopped when he saw Sarah, a middle-aged woman in blood-splattered scrubs, surrounded by unconscious men in tactical gear. "Ma'am, are you injured?" "Not my blood," Sarah said, setting down the rifle parts. "Commander Reynolds is secure in room 307. The civilians are locked in the break room. No casualties on our side. The operator stared at her, then touched his radio. Command, the situation is already resolved by hospital staff. 30 minutes later, the ICU was swarming with federal agents. Sarah was giving her statement when the elevator doors opened and a full SEAL team poured out. 12 operators in full kit, led by a massive red-headed lieutenant commander with a tactical beard. He stopped when he saw Sarah sitting calmly in a plastic chair, drinking terrible coffee. "You're Dusty," he said. It wasn't a question. Sarah looked up. "Depends who's asking." "Lieutenant Commander Briggs, SEAL Team 3. Reynolds is one of ours. We came to extract him." "You're late," Sarah said mildly. "I already handled it." Briggs looked at the zip-tied contractors, then back at Sarah. A slow smile spread across his weathered face. "I heard the stories. Fallujah. The ghost medic who held off an insurgent assault for 6 hours with nothing but a pistol and a field kit. I thought they were bullshit." "They were mostly accurate," Sarah said. Briggs turned to his team. "Attention!" 12 SEALs snapped to attention in perfect unison. Briggs saluted. "On behalf of Naval Special Warfare Command, thank you for protecting our brother." Sarah stood slowly, her knee protesting. She returned the salute, crisp and formal. "It's what we do." 2 weeks later, Sarah stood in her new office at St. Jude's. Not a locker room or a supply closet, an actual office with her name on the door. Litin Cole. Sarah Dusty Miller, Retmar Director, Trauma Training Program. General Mitchell had visited that morning with an offer. Returned to active duty as a JSOC medical advisor. Full rank restoration. A chance to get back in the fight. She'd turned him down. "I've had enough war, Tom," she'd said. "But these kids, these arrogant residents who think medicine is about being the smartest person in the room, they need to learn what it really means. I can do more good here." Now she stood at her window, watching the next class of residents arrive for their first day of her program. Young, confident, cocky, just like Sterling. She smiled. They had no idea what was coming. Behind her, on the wall, hung a shadow box. Inside, her silver star, her combat medical badge, a faded ranger tab, and a handwritten note from Commander Reynolds. "You saved my life twice, Dusty. Once in the ER, once in the ICU. The world needs more warriors like you, warriors who fight for the living, not the dead. Semper Fi doesn't just belong to Marines. It belongs to anyone who refuses to leave a brother behind. You taught me that." "Jack." Sarah turned from the window. She had work to do. The ghost medic had found her final mission, teaching the next generation that medicine wasn't about ego or glory. It was about the patient. Always the patient, and anyone who forgot that lesson would answer to her. The end.